Our next conversation is still going to be about education and reforming education so that then it serves the country that we have is a conversation that we want to hold. We are joined by a guest who's all the way from Texas, the USA, but he's here in the studio with us, Sylvanus Nacheri. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Karibu sana to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante sana.
Sylvanus, I know you're one of the people who follow this conversation online.
I do.
All the time. Mm-hmm. Do you follow it live or do you catch up with it later?
Most of the time I catch up with it because I can be very busy, so catch up with it later, yes.
Yeah. Which part of Texas, for those who are watching now?
Houston.
In Houston. Guys in Houston.
Houston is your capital,
for Texas? Austin.
Austin.
Kuna
jamaa moja ninajua jina yake.
Kuna jamaa.
Austin.
Austin.
Yeah, Austin. Yes.
Yeah. Houston is a big one. It's like
Houston
sort of like
is
a commercial center.
It's the fourth largest city
in America.
the United States.
In America.
Yes.
Hiyo ni kubwa.
That's fourth largest.
Fourth largest ni kubwa sana.
That must be huge.
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
I've been there for the last 14 years.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Live, work, study, and everything there.
I studied in Virginia.
Okay.
I went to a school called Virginia Tech.
Mm-hmm. You've heard of Virginia
Blacksburg,
Tech?
We have heard, and they say good things about Virginia Tech.
Yeah, it's a good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a research university.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Karibu nyumbani, and welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Asante.
It's good to have you here.
Asante.
And
thank you.
And thank you for following our conversations from all the way in Houston.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to have a conversation about education, and you'll guide us through it with the questions that we'll be asking. CT will tell you two things. One, he'll give you the proverb, and your job will be to give us an interpretation of the proverb. Now, why don't you give him our day's proverb?
Yes, our proverbs for this week come from the Republic of Tunisia, Africa's most northernest. That is me calling it northernest. Northernest country. You don't get more north than Tunisia. Okay? The proverb: he who is covered with other people's clothing is naked.
He who is covered with other people's clothing is naked. Dr. Nacheri, what's your interpretation of this one?
I would say it means you are not you. You are exposed. You do not know what's going on around you. And you are not aware of your environment, basically. So you are covered by other people's ideas, whatever. And that's what I would say.
You are not yourself.
You're not yourself.
It's an interesting one.
It is actually. Yes, the persona you present or the image that you present is actually not you.
It's reflecting others.
Yes, others, somebody else's. And when the reflection turns on to you, it may be something quite different from what you've been reflecting. Yes.
That's very true. That's very true. Now, Dr. Nacheri, you have been very vocal on matters of education and our education in this country. And looking at what's been happening, in terms of we've been going through reforms in our education system. We are transitioning from 844 to CBC. We are looking at how we can then have competence-based coming all the way, looking at our TVETs and our universities and whether they are actually equipped to train for purpose and skill for purpose with what the market needs and what the global needs are right now. As somebody who has gone through an entire education system, what do you make of our education system? Are we on the right path? Are we collapsed? Do we need more reforms?
Unfortunately, we are not on the right path.
Allah?
We're not. Let me start this way. I'll discuss education very differently from most people discuss it.
Okay.
There are two worlds out there which are conflicting. They are opposites of each other. They contradict each other. They are opposites of each other. There is the culturally diverse world. The culturally diverse world is the old world. In that world, life is brutish, basically. It's a very unjust world. It's a very unstable world. It's a very unfair world. So all evils exist in that world. Cultural diversity generally is the generator of all problems of mankind. All wars that have ever been fought in this world are cultural. That's simply like that. So that's one world. There is a second world, which is the opposite. That world consists of sovereign states and nations indivisible. Now, that world is a new world. It's individualistic. Remember, the first world is culturally diverse.
Yeah.
The second one, the one consisting of sovereign states and nations indivisible, consists of individuals. It's individualistic, and so therefore it's integrated. I'm still talking theoretically. It's an integrated world. It's a fair world. It's a just world. It's a stable world. And so those are the two worlds.
Which one is fair, stable, just, individualistic one?
The one that consists of sovereign states and nations indivisible.
Okay.
That's the fair world, the just world. And so let's come back to Kenya now. Kenya, in colonial times, Kenya was created by colonialists. The boundaries were arbitrarily drawn by colonialists. So it consists of all people. They didn't care who was where. They wanted territory, they wanted to control the place, to exploit it and so forth. So they did not care about the people. And so all things that we hear about colonialism really are not because the white people are here. It's because the society was culturally diverse. The territory they created was culturally diverse. And so this dominant culture, well, then maybe European, then there are all these others and so forth. And Europeans advanced that, they liked it that way for their own advantage. Now, of these two worlds, the transition from the old world to the new world requires education. Education is the means to transition from the old world to the new world. Education is the means to eradicate differences, is the means to eradicate basically cultural diversity. This question of gender, race, tribes, education, if a schools generate education, those differences where they cannot coexist. Education does not coexist with cultural diversity, basically. It doesn't. And so in Kenya, mistakes were made from the beginning, and I can understand why. Kenya didn't have universities colonial time. At independence, we didn't have any universities, and so we didn't have, that higher training that could help understand how the world works. And so at independence, I'll say one thing about colonialists. When we got independence, colonialists basically knew what they had created is not a nation. It was not sustainable. It could not go on like that. They used it for their own advantage. But then now, if you want to become a nation, you want to become a people, you want freedom and all that, then become a nation and a sovereign state. So that's where the ideas of sovereign Kenyan state, Kenyan nation indivisible, came in. We were supposed to become that. And remember, there are ideals to be worked for, to be worked on. And what I'm saying is that education is the means to bring about that change from transition from colonial society to a new Kenya independent society, free and fair and just education. What I mean that could be achieved. Unfortunately, independence, like I said, I don't blame our founders, but we all know that soon after independence, one of the things that happened was President Kenyatta and the independence leaders decided that constitution wasn't a good constitution, it's foreign. it reflected foreign ideas. And so, rather than go by that, what the Constitution said, because that Constitution said Kenya should become a sovereign state and a nation, indivisible. That's what the Constitution said. But those are foreign ideas. In sociological literature, the ideas of a sovereign state and a nation indivisible, they're ideas that are out of the country. They're not part of the society. They're outside. They are foreign to internal society here. They are foreign. And so when our leaders said, these are foreign ideas, those are some of the things that actually they said. So President Kenyatta and his colleagues decided to govern this country based on the African culture. They tried to Africanize it, and it's for Africans, and we should make our own rules and govern ourselves in this according to our traditions and the way we want. And so they moved away from that. And so there was a conflict. There's a constitution which says empowered people, individual rights and the right to vote, choose your own leaders, right to live anywhere and all that. But then there's also this reactionary vision of Kenya that our independence leaders had. These were colonialists. And we are independent now and want to structure things the way we want them. And so they continued that way. And so basically they continued unwittingly. What they did was to continue colonialism. So when I hear some leaders, more progressive leaders talk, this is like neo-colonialism, neo-whatever. I understand why that can happen. Because basically the colonial society that was created was continued. Cultural diversity in Kenya is a colonial legacy. It's the colonials who created it. Colonials created Kenya with all these different peoples. That's a colonial legacy.
Okay.
And so there's no way Kenya, in my mind, Kenya can make progress in this context.
So what do we need?
We need...
Redraw our boundaries?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at independence with this constitution, we're to become, just by declaring Kenya a sovereign state and a nation indivisible, that constitution decreed, basically, that the government of Kenya, the Kenyan state, was to form a national system of schooling. And a national system of schooling was the means to restructure Kenya, to recreate Kenya, reconstruct Kenya, to renew it, to create new people, new citizens for the new society.
Okay.
And that has never happened. We have never had policies of education that are informed by the ideals of a sovereign Kenyan state and a Kenyan nation indivisible. We've never had that.
So what do we have instead?
We have a system of schooling that is reproducing Kenya. It's not recreating. It's reproducing. So it's reproducing colonialists created a cultural diverse society, and the system of schooling that we have is reproducing. And when I talk about schooling, I'm referring to kindergarten to grade 12, Form 4. That's where reconstruction takes place. That's where education takes place. It's only children. King Frederick of Prussia, in 1863, when he started the first national system of schooling, he did that. It was called mass schooling. Now, the reason for that was it is children that you can mold. It's children that you can reconstruct. Adults are grown. There's nothing you can do about them. And so when our leaders appeal to adults, our policies basically are about adults. So you change, you let us be united. We are one people. That's rhetoric. The reality is, when they say that, it's because the country is divided. Different peoples, this gender, based on gender, and that's why we pass these laws like, 1/3 gender rule. The picture that I've sent you, that's what the outcome is in my mind. So because the education system has never been structured to reconstruct Kenya. the Kenyan population to renew the Kenyan society, then it's going on. So these problems that are associated with cultural diversity continue multiplying because we are divided. When we are divided, remember the Tower of Babel.
They're speaking different languages.
Those guys were building and they're almost reaching heaven. The argument was, look at them coming here. Oh, it's because they are one. So when we are one, there are no problems, and so we're focused because we are socialized that way. And the sky's the limit.
Dr. let me ask you the question.
Yes.
Before we take a break. So then paint the picture of what you think should have happened at independence with our education system. So what we had did not serve the purpose of what our independence leaders had and what they should have done. Okay? So how should it have looked like in your books?
What should have happened was to start putting in place a national system of schooling that granted all Kenyan children, all of them, throughout the country, access to free access to schooling. Free access to schooling, not free education.
Free access to schooling. What does that mean?
Now, that means granting them access to the quality, the type, and the quantity of schooling that is traditionally reserved for the elite in society, any society in the world.
Are you saying that in 1960s, in the beginnings of our independence, our republic, we did not have free access to schooling?
We didn't have. In colonial times, the colonialists, colonialists, their children, the whites, had free access. They could start from the womb. They are socialized that way from the womb. Children are taken care of, and so they are put in good schools. All facilities provided. Anything that could prevent them from going to school is removed, and so very favorable policies for them.
Okay.
So then a child can go on to wherever. If you want to go to university, go wherever you want to go. So that's those free access to schooling.
Okay.
Africans, in other words, the system that we have now, like for example, when we have things like practical knowledge. We started with 844. I was a teacher in primary school here. So we had garages and whatever to try to, because the government even anticipates children stopping schooling at grade 8. So they're being helped out. When you don't go to secondary, can go get a job, can do something, can be a juakari or whatever.
Okay.
So our children have never had free access to school.
So our system was not seamless.
It was never seamless.
It had breaks. It had the grade 4 matriculation stop.
All these examinations.
It had the standard 8 exam, or what did you do? 7?
Seven. CPE. I did CPE myself.
The CPE, so 7. Some of you are going to drop off.
Yes.
By design.
And the government will be very happy announcing that 260 children are not going to secondary school. Only 100,000 are going, So that kind of thing.
So that had an impact. Our guest, Dr. Sylvanus Nacheri, is still here. So that's the education system that we had. It was still, we basically just replicated what was there in the colonial days. We continued with it. And all the children of Kenya knew that, you could go to school, but then at grade 7, at standard 7, you have to sit an exam, and it will be mchujo. A huge percentage of you will drop off. And when you drop off, then you have to take another pathway. But because it was not ending there, Dr. Harry, it wasn't just ending there. At grade 7, when you drop off, you go to the polytechnics. So you still have access to education.
No.
You continue into secondary school. At Form 4, when you sit your exam and you don't go to higher, you have access to polytechnic. You go into the A levels, then here you are more likely to end up in university. It's still access to education.
It's not really.
Why?
Education is about training the mind, not the hands. There are theories of education out there. What you're suggesting is economic theory of education. Those are the theories that say what you are describing. Education is for work, basically. It's like training. Education is training. It's not. Education really exists, is a force. is the means to remold, to recreate the child, to train the mind. In the Western world, that's the secret they have. There's nothing else that they beat us with. They're focused on the child. In their schools, K-12, there's no practical knowledge. There simply isn't, especially kindergarten, elementary, and even middle school. There isn't. Even secondary school, they start introducing some business courses and so forth, but the core curriculum
is knowledge, not
is
skill.
Still academic. The goal is to train the mind, to turn it from all these other forces. And how they do it? The state pays for it. Whoever pays for it gets the loyalty. So the goal is to train the mind, create Americans, create Virginians. I attended my daughter's graduation when she finished grade 12. So I didn't understand it because my schools were different when I left my grade 12. But now there was a lot of force, a lot of interest. I was wondering, why are these people so interested in this just grade 12? And the whole community was coming for graduation.
Yeah.
And so when I got there is when one of the state officials was there at the graduation representing the state of Virginia. And he stood up and said, everybody rise. And then he declared, we are here today, gathered here today, to represent, to celebrate the creation of 467 new citizens of this great state of Virginia. And I was writing my dissertation at that time, and it was going on that line. I said, oh man, so this is why these school buses, I was coming from a garage one day, and I reached where my daughter was going to the middle school. It was a brand new school, you'd think it's a university. And so when I got there, we had to stop because the buses were ferrying children out of the school. And I counted those buses. I was very keen because I was writing my dissertation. And there were 29 buses. New buses with drivers, with chaperones. And I, a parent, was not paying a penny. And my question was why? So weeks later, I went to this graduation. Then this state official stands up during graduation, high school graduation, and declares, we are gathered here to celebrate the creation of this number of new citizens of the great state of Virginia. So that's what sociology is. That's sociological education. That's what I'm discussing is from sociology of education. And so it goes with this argument, it takes the village to train a child, to raise a child. The village is the state. So nobody pays, because if you put parents like we put in Kenya, we pay for kindergarten. We encourage them even to go to private school and all that. Private schools are shunned in America because the states competed with private interests. These are very stiff competition throughout the years. And so not the Russian, the communist way of banning private school and all that. But here, these ones were competing. So the states was competing by building good schools, the organization of it, build schools, train teachers, employ the best teachers you can find, highly and all that. And so gradually the private school interests died and the state took over. And that's how America is built. That's the strength of America. There's nothing else. So the children.
Let's start again. The education system, is it centralized like ours? Does America have a Ministry of Education?
It's very highly, that's a good question. It's very highly decentralized. That's an important thing. To have free access to school, to achieve this goal of really schooling all the children, we don't need the Teacher Service Commission. It should go. This question of Kenya National Examinations Council, go. All these centralized forces, even the curriculum is designed at the local level. It's the most decentralized schooling.
If it is decentralized, then what is the commonality? What's the common thread then in the education system? Because if you move from one state to the other, I assume it would not be difficult for you to enter the education system in another state.
You won't.
Now, so what is it that the thread that binds them?
The curriculum, and the thread that binds them, the state pays for it.
who develops the curriculum? Because if it is decentralized, then I would assume that the state or organs that are in charge of education would want an education that suits the purposes, primarily the purposes of that particular state. I'm asking, there must be something common in the curriculum that you will find in every state. That's the question I'm asking.
What is common? You're right. What is common? One thing, number one, based on your question, the education in America doesn't serve interests of the state. It's nation building. K-12 schools are for nation building. And so the states, each state, and it's required by the federal law, each state must provide free access to schooling. And so there are debates. My professor was one of those who texted that when I started school, they had taken Kentucky to court. We're in Virginia, he's a professor in Virginia, but then it's an education union. So they took Kentucky to court because
they took the state
county
to
to court. Mm-hmm. And the argument was, look, education system in Kentucky is not constitutional. According to it doesn't adhere to the constitution of the state of Kentucky, which says there will be free access, equal opportunity in the K-12 schools, in the public schooling. So, and then they came with the data. Look at how much money is being used to this county here, how much money is located to this county here, and why this is causing problems. So, money must be equitably distributed. And the state must produce the money. No religion, no parents, no divisive forces in schooling. K-12 schools in the United States.
So these were issues that were coming after all this matter of integrating schools had been sorted out. This matter of integrating school transport, as we call it in Kenya, or busing, as they call it there, had been sorted out.
No, not necessarily. Those ideas were always there from the 19th century because something like European nationalism, we've read that in history, that idea was there. The European nationalism was about the child. The child, it was a century for the child if you read literature. That's what nationalism was, because they had discovered, they have known that to transform our societies from all the problems they had to socialize children collectively and equitably and equally, give them equal access to schooling. So that idea was there. But now, as human beings, any society, it's a big war. It's not a smooth thing. It's because there are interests. If you start in Kenya today, there are those ones who are going to Peponi, they have got money. There are those ones who are going to Catholic schools, and the Catholic Church will be up in arms. And so in America, there was the southern states still was taking to slavery for a long time, and until 1950, in the 1950s, is when the Brown cases, the Supreme Court decided that there's nothing like separate but equal, because they're arguing, well, we don't want our children to go with the with the black children. And so in the 1950s, when the case went on to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided, well, separate but equal is not constitutional.
Actually, those matters, the path that we now see was settled when Lyndon Johnson became president after Kennedy had died. In fact, it was a very interesting issue between the Republicans and the Democrats. Now, most people don't even know that the South was Democrats.
Yes.
Okay?
They owned the farm, the plantations and all
that. And that Abraham Lincoln was actually a Republican. This is something that most people don't know. Okay? But the idea of desegregation had been a thorn in the flesh, and it required this is what people like Martin Luther King and so forth were fighting about. This thing of wanting to ensure that every citizen has that equal access, as you call it. I like that word, access. Yes.
Yeah.
And equal. Equal meaning the funding is equal, and so the opportunities are equal. The quality of education provided is equal.
Yes. And remove all the forces. Not a parent pays a penny. Like when I was student buses, look at the buses, what amazed me, My child had been going there from grade 5 when they came there when the youngest was in grade 3, grade 1 actually. She was 3 years old. So she went through the system. So that middle school, that's where she was going to school. And all the brothers, brand new school, brand new, and they pick them from the door and bring them back in the evening, and I am not paying a cent. So that hit me. That's what I was asking. What's going on? What's going on? And the answer was answered during the graduation of my eldest daughter. Well,
they were investing
in children. The power of the United States and the Western countries, different from the reason the Soviet Union, my theory, my argument. Soviet Union collapsed, so it was a big country, collapsed. And my argument, my theory is the Soviet Union never paid attention to children. It never made any effort to reconstruct the whole society and create one society. America is a very big country, from east coast, wherever, and they all speak one language, and they all have common interests. You move from one state to the other one, they're basically the same. The child.
And they're all American. And they're all American.
Yes. The child. The problems are still there. This is gender problems, issues there. Right now, election is going on there, but gender is there and all that. But it's a big fight. It will take years. So it's not development is not like our leaders here say, oh, I've come here to do this or this development. Addressing problems in society is not development. It's not. You're not developing. You're not building the country. You're not building the nation. You are solving problems. And our leaders have mistaken that with nation building. How I...
Nacheri, it isn't... Would you say that they have forgotten, or that's the extent of their understanding of what development is?
I think that's the extent. I think that's the extent. I think we started just badly. Maybe if we started well, because they had George Washington, American, so they had leaders who had foresight, who even early on created the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. So that idea was planted very early. So even in 1950s, when the Supreme Court decided, separate but equal was not constitutional, took 200 years, but they got there. So the laws were good from the beginning. Now look at us, we have a second constitution. Now this constitution, basically, I've never liked it.
Why?
It's really constitutionalized colonialism, cultural diversity, because it's the centerpiece of it, advance the cultural diversity of Kenya. It makes sure that the government consists of all tribes and all this and all that, and all regions and women and men and whatever. That's what it's doing. It's chaos.
How is it?
And it's contradicting the ideas of the sovereignty of the Kenyan state, because you cannot have a sovereign Kenyan state and Kenya being cultural diversity. You can't.
Why not?
Because sovereign states are individualistic.
But recognizing the diversity of a society, acknowledging it exists, is that not the first step to understanding how you can unify them?
It's killing us. It's killing us.
How?
Because then you are recognizing it, and then you are feeding it. And when you give a Maasai a position, because he's a Maasai in the cabinet, and a woman nominate them, put them in parliament because they are women, you are feeding these divisions.
Actually, it's what Americans refer to as affirmative action, because there's the acknowledgement that there are certain groups within our society who were disadvantaged. And to right size and to bring about a more equitable situation, you then have this opportunity to do precisely that. Now, this affirmative action, the place that you work in and come from, they introduced this concept to us. We understand it from them. And that is why even now, when one looks at opportunities and looks at the pecking order of what it is that is considered, where you come from, your race, your gender, those things are considered. And that is why even the universities, diversity is a very important component.
I agree with you.
And it's something that they push for.
Yes. Now, unconstitutionally. Unconstitutionally. First of all, the idea
how they elect the leaders,
they
have to factor in, and that's why the collegiate system comes in, so that you elevate the voice of those that are considered small.
Affirmative action doesn't mean what it's thought to mean.
What does it mean?
When that idea of affirmative action came up by which president what is in the 1960s, declared it, assigned the executive order to an executive order. You know, that time, black people could not go to college, white colleges, basically. When I read some higher education law, I took some higher education law classes. The University of Syracuse, there's a girl, black child, female, who wanted to go to that school, and just, you don't think about the qualifications or whatever their ability and all that, just because she's black, just seeing her she's black, you are not the type that goes to this school. Now, affirmative action was designed to end those kinds of things. Give people, based on, if they are qualified for a job, it will start with schools. Grant them access to schooling, no discrimination,
So
because of who they are, because of race.
It was to remove discrimination.
Yes.
Not to promote the minority.
Yes, not to promote minority. And that's where now the problem came in, when now minorities, for these major universities find minorities go there, it was very difficult. And then the U.S. government, because of this Martin Luther King demonstrations and pushing this, reforms and all that, so the U.S. Congress decided, we are not going to give you funds. No funding for higher education. Any university that does not have people of color among its students and faculty, no funding. That forced colleges and universities to accept people of color, regardless of their qualifications. So that's the debate that goes on until now. The case is still going in the Supreme Court, because that forced them. And there's no college in America that can operate without federal funds. There isn't.
Nacheri, there's a little point here, and this is where, on this subject of ensuring that those who had previously disadvantaged, it's an admission that they didn't enjoy the rights that other people had enjoyed. Forget other people coming from other countries, just within that same country. Now, how then, for instance, in a country like ours, if I were to give an example, a child who is studying in what you call a national school, and a child who is studying in a county school, which is a day school, take your pick in some of the more remote parts of our country that border other countries. The disadvantages are glaring.
Yes.
So, how do you give these people a chance? Do you create national schools in the region so that they can go to them, and will they have the same facilities? Or do you ensure that because of the disadvantages and understanding that they cannot achieve the same potential as those who have the advantages, enable them to actually come to these places because, and probably at a lower grade, simply because you understand, if the chances given to these other people had existed, they would probably have met those requirements. Now, none of these systems are perfect, but the intention is clear. Because in the absence of that, some people would remain downtrodden forever. They'd never change, nothing would ever move, and the communities would remain exactly where they are. So, yes, they always need tweaking. It's like when you talk about the civil rights movements and the things that went on there. That discussion was a good one until now. Discussions around reverse racism came into being, because when you advantage others, there are those who will say, "But now we're being discriminated against." So it introduces a completely different discussion. But these discussions are good because it then opens your mind to understanding that many of these things are not completed; they're always a work in progress.
Civil rights movement did a good job. They wanted, I don't know whether I should say did a good job, but put pressure on the states and the U.S. government, including the federal government, that people of color, basically black people, must be accepted to colleges and universities. So there were riots, there were problems, serious problems. So reactionary policies are always bad. Always bad. They are never good. So the U.S. Congress reacted to these pressures, to ease these pressures. by declaring if you are a higher education institution,
you must include, or you don't get funding.
So it was forced. So that's the problem that you're saying is still going on now, because it was reactionary. It was not, the Supreme Court decision in Brown cases was a good one, because it simply said, well, it is true, the policy of separate but equal is unconstitutional. There's nothing like separate but equal when it comes to cultural diversity. There's prestige. Some schools will be prestigious than others. Virginia Tech, where I went to, is more prestigious than Virginia State University, which was started the same year, but that one was black. Virginia Tech is a completely different world. So the Supreme Court, those are some of the factors that the Supreme Court decided. You cannot have separate but equal. But now, because of Congress, by mistake, everywhere we make mistakes are made, decreed, basically, you must have this kind of students. So I did my master's thesis on admissions at Virginia Tech. Admissions at first time admission to Virginia Tech. So my question was, because the university says on its logo, admissions at Virginia Tech is race blind. So that was my question. Is it really race blind? And when we ran the data, admissions data, it was not true that it was race blind. Now, this being race blind, the university was favoring black students, especially black males. The statistics showed that. So they would come in with lower grades than white students, and especially the male whites. So it's true. An effort is made, and so that's created a lot of problems, and so those are problems now start going to courts. Now, with the white say reverse discrimination that you're talking about. Now, we are not being discriminated against in favor of black people. And my master's thesis, my professor was very interested in that, so I said, oh, okay, so this is what's going on. But because the university could even send money. Admission fees is waived to enable them to come to the university. Activities were organized for them to lure them to the university, and it was just a mess. But so that was unfair.
It's a very, very interesting conversation that we've had. I wish we had some more time. And before you go, maybe we can invite you again. Before you head back.
Thank you.
Dr. Sylvanus Nacheri is an educational leadership and policy studies expert. He's been our guest today, just provoking our minds and saying, let's think about our education system in this country.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.